Hey folks, it's Rod with Pow Group. Welcome back on the Pursuit of Wealth. Today is Wednesday. It's August 28th, 2024. And with me today is Aras Azadian, co-founder and CEO of Avicanna, which trades on the TSX under ticker symbol AVCN and also trades on the OTC under AVCNF. Welcome, Aras, and thank you for taking the time to meet with me today.
Thanks for having me, Rod. Happy to be here.
You bet. Excited to speak to you today. I have a lot of questions, so we'll jump right to it. Maybe just start with your background. Maybe just introduce yourself for the audience who isn't familiar with yourself, your professional career, and maybe just about how you got started in the cannabis space.
Yeah, we'd love to. So started off prior to the cannabis space, I was working in biotechnology, worked as a management consultant for a number of companies, was C-suite for an oncology company. So I've been around the space in terms of biotech, pharmaceuticals in my early stages of my career, and really saw the opportunity in terms of cannabinoid-based medicine, the impact that it was already starting to have on patients' lives, but the potential it really had in terms of what it may be able to do for patients from a medical and pharmaceutical perspective, and took the opportunity, built Avicanna out, founding CEO, been in the seat for what is now 9 years, almost 9 years. So it's been an incredible journey to kind of transition from biotechnology executive role into the emerging cannabis space.
Absolutely. And I think that background really, is going to be beneficial for you long term because, like I say, there's so much applications from a medical standpoint, and we got to bring in the traditional system into medicine of the future, I call it. But no, that's great. And you're also one of the OGs in the space. Like, you're one of the original CEOs. So kudos to you for that. Could you maybe just give a summary of Avicanna? You're a medical cannabinoid company. You're not really a licensed producer. Maybe if you could just touch on that. I know you're in 20 plus countries. You've got a pretty big footprint. And maybe just give us a rundown of Avicanna.
Yeah, would love to. So Avicanna was originally created in 2015. We saw the opportunity, as I was mentioning earlier, in terms of cannabinoid-based medicine, but what we saw was a gap. And the gap was, how do you standardize cannabinoid-based medicine the same way you standardize any other pharmaceutical or any other medical application? How do you generate the evidence that you need to get the medical community to actually adopt it and insert medical cannabis into the healthcare regimen? That was the gap. And when we initially tackled it, we brought in some scientific people, we brought in some experts in terms of formulation development, and we started focusing really on an initial product line, which was a transdermal patch. So we started with that. We were admitted into a Johnson & Johnson incubator here in Toronto. We're part of the Mars Discovery District, which is really the Silicon Valley of biotech here in Canada. It's a very prestigious center to be in. Started working on formulations, strictly pharmaceutical formulations, then got involved with University of Toronto, the Faculty of Pharmacy, which is one of the most important centers in the world for drug development and pharmaceuticals. That's where penicillin was discovered. And that really formed the company's sort of, I would say, framework and infrastructure in terms of formulation development, drug delivery systems, preclinical and clinical development. And we went down this pharmaceutical pathway. We were sort of the Canadian, earlier stage GW Pharma. We had a couple of drug candidates, one focused on epidermolysis bullosa, one on neuropathic pain. And we were going down that pathway until sort of the cannabis sector bubble burst. And, we all experienced that. And I was under the impression, incorrectly, that, being a pharma company focused on cannabinoid-based medicine, strictly medical applications, is going to separate us from the recreational side of the sector, and therefore the bubble burst will not impact us. And we were wrong. If I think maybe out of the bathwater, we were treated as a cannabis company, and this is something that since day one I've been sort of indicating that there should be a separation in terms of cannabinoid-based companies that are recreational or adult use versus medical and pharmaceutical, because that's what we are. But fast forward years and years, today, 2024, we are on track to do around $30 million a year, strictly for medical and pharmaceutical applications of cannabinoids, which is done through very high margin sort of revenue channels. So we are active, or have been to some extent active, in north of 20 countries now. We have a pharmaceutical that's approved in South America for catastrophic epileptic conditions, specifically Lennox-Gastaut and Dravet syndrome. We own and operate one of the most successful medical cannabis platforms in the world. I would say one of the most successful and most complete, which we acquired from Shoppers Drug Mart. I think that's a very interesting story on its own, and that was a major catalyst for us end of last year. So we're quite active within the medical and pharmaceutical applications of cannabinoid-based medicine, and we do that with 30 plus finished products that are in various markets. So that's who the company is today. Of course, we can dive into the various aspects of it, but that all is derived from the initial phases of our story, which was intellectual property development, advanced drug delivery systems, and utilizing advanced drug delivery systems to deliver cannabinoids for specific conditions and to be able to back that up with evidence that you need and standardization that you need, so that the medical community and the pharmaceutical community and patients can treat cannabinoids as every other medicine.
Right. You're basically speaking the same language, right? And not reinventing the wheel, just kind of piggybacking off of what the medical industry is already used to, right?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of education, you want to get physicians to prescribe cannabis. You cannot go in and, say, dude, would you like to try my joint? No, you got to go in and say, this is a standardized dose. Here's the pharmacokinetics. Here's the bioavailability. Here's how we believe it's going to treat particular conditions. And I like to use a very specific analog. For example, if someone is suffering from sleep, and we know THC, for example, can help patients with sleep. However, imagine if that patient is given a very consistent dose every day that knows it works for them. But that dose is designed to be slow release so that it's released over a period of time. It allows a patient to fall asleep but stay asleep. Where someone is suffering from neuropathic pain, they need something that's in fact the opposite, very fast acting. So this is where you would have like a sublingual tablet, for example. So and identify, first of all, developing the technology that allows the cannabinoids to be stable, allows the product to be consistent, reproducible, but then to take those technologies and commercialize them through medical, which is what we've done, generate real world evidence, which is what we've done, and then to start actually identifying what formulations, doses, and ratios in particular are best suited for what clinical pathology or patient population is not a new invention. This is what's typically done. Right. What's unique here is with cannabis, you have the opportunity to actually commercialize, medically generate data, where with new molecules, you can't. You have to go through all this toxicity and safety, which obviously cannabinoids have proven to be already safe. So it's a very interesting dynamic. It's a very interesting opportunity. The fact that we're in Canada, where it's federally legal to do the work that we do, and we work with the largest academic and clinical institutions in Canada and continue to do that and cooperate and collaborate with them is amazing. We've had over 20 trials conducted here in Canada. We're pioneers, and I know yesterday a lot of my sort of colleagues in a way were upset about the DEA delay in terms of rescheduling. Right. I like it. Because in Canada we're pioneers, we're ahead, we're filing patents, we're obtaining patents, we're getting clinical data, we're internationalizing. So while the US is figuring out what it wants to do, we're really building the actual foundation of what will be a global medical company.
Absolutely. That's a good point. And I posted a video on it as well. And not to go off too much on a tangent, but if we look at what the actual expectation timeline for that roadmap was, it could have been anywhere from like 5 to 7 years for rescheduling the pathway to unfold, right? And I added up all of the speculation of how long it could take, and it was around 18 to 20 months. And we're, if we get the hearing in December, which is scheduled for December 2nd, that we're 10 months ahead of schedule, essentially, right? So it's actually moving along quite fast. And we'll see what happens during the elections. That's a whole different topic. But I know you mentioned, Johnson & Johnson reached out to you. You had that partnership with Shoppers Drug Mart. I think that speaks volumes, and, universities. And for those that don't know, a lot of my viewers in the US, it's basically the equivalent to like a Walgreens. So if you're not familiar with Shoppers Drug Mart, they're huge here in Canada. Maybe if you can just, kind of go through that experience. I know when you first met with them, they're like, oh, great, like another kind of MJ CEO. Maybe just, were they surprised when you got in there? Like, were they, were you speaking the same language? Were they surprised whenever you started speaking to them in their type of language?
So that would be more J&J. So when we first started, we were obviously an early stage company, startup 2015, and we were admitted into a Johnson & Johnson incubator actually called J Labs. And initially, they said, no, we will not deal with cannabinoid-based companies. Of course not. And when we met them, we presented our sort of transdermal patch and biotech pharmaceutical approach to formulation development and evidence generation. Then they admitted us. They gave us lab space for 5 years, mentored us. So And in many ways, we've been mentored and sort of supported from senior executives at the J&J level. And we've matured and we've come out of their incubator and have our own labs and have our own infrastructure and have our own facilities around the world now. So that era is over. And because of the cannabinoid sort of association, they actually don't have an equity position or anything like that. So that was kind of, I would say, the beginning of the journey. First major, I would say, validation, having, the world's largest pharma company give you lab space and support. The Shoppers Drug Mart deal was a little bit different. We were, even though we're not a licensed producer, we were already utilizing our pharmaceutical formulations under Rofido, which is the brand that you have on the screen here. And we were commercializing it through Shoppers Drug Mart, which had a medical cannabis division called Medical Cannabis by Shoppers. The executive summary is they decided to get out of the cannabis industry, and they couldn't just wind down this ultra successful medical cannabis platform from a sense that patients were getting their products, patients were getting pharmacist-led patient support programs, physicians were getting medical education and training. It was a more I still argue the most complete medical cannabis platform, because it wasn't Canopy or Aurora's platform where they only sell their own products. It was a very different type of platform, and they knew that getting out of the industry means they're in many ways potentially abandoning those patients, and they're not going to be able to provide continuation of care. So even though we're not a licensed producer, they knew that we're, I would argue, the only real fully medical company in the industry that have an understanding of patients' needs. So we were able to agree with them that we will provide continuation of care. We will continue to conduct the clinical trials that they were enrolled in, most of which were through us anyways. And we successfully took over and acquired the division from them August last year. So it's been exactly 12 months. We relaunched it under what is called MyMedi.ca, which is what you were showing. That's our platform. We're running MyMedi.ca through a Canadian licensed producer called Northern Green Cannabis, which was recently acquired by Curaleaf.
Yeah.
So it's worked out. Yeah, we were kind of, inherited Curaleaf, which is, the largest cannabis company in the world today, as a partner as well, which has been a fantastic relationship. But we built MyMedi, and we took what Shoppers built for 6 years, which was this complete medical cannabis platform, patient support program, insurance adjudication, preferred vendor status with Manulife, WSIB, etc. And then we added our sophisticated sort of pharma medical approach to cannabinoid-based medicine, of course, more of our own products. And I believe MyMedi is the most complete medical cannabis platform in the world today, because it has these standardized evidence-based formulations of products. It has this complete patient support program, complete medical education program. There's tons of clinical trials and data being generated out of it, observational studies being conducted out of it. And we take a lot of pride in that, and it's, I think, something that we would then modulate, and I think something we would replicate internationally as well, because medical can be international, and I think that's a major thing people don't realize, is that there's a United Nations Convention of Narcotics that does not permit or allow the export of recreational cannabis. So, for example, Uruguay is recreational, Canada is recreational. I cannot ship recreational cannabis from Canada to Uruguay, because that's
really? Okay.
Convention of Narcotics. Same way you can't export heroin, but you can export opioids for medicine. So bad sort of parallelism, but medical and pharmaceutical and research purposes, cannabinoids can be exported. That's why you're exporting. Companies are exporting to Germany or Australia. We are exporting to many countries. So we look at cannabinoid-based medicine not as a recreational or as a cannabis opportunity. We look at it as a medical opportunity for pain, sleep, anxiety, depression, epilepsy, et cetera, and that's what we're targeting. And we really look at Canada as a proof of concept, as a place to generate data, file patents, build proof of concept, build processes, and then replicate that internationally as pioneers. And that's the stage, I think, that we're finally at.
Interesting. Yeah, you literally took my next question. How do you differentiate yourselves? And I think that's a very key aspect of the industry now, is being able to differentiate, focus on whether it be a niche or whether it be a specific sector of the industry. The industry is huge, and at the beginning, everybody was trying to be everything to everybody. So the fact that you have your medical, how would you say you differentiate from other medical companies in Canada?
I mean, I don't really think there is any other real medical companies in Canada that are specifically only focused on that, and I think that's important, because there's fantastic companies that are involved in the medical space that we have very good relationships and partnerships with. For example, Canopy has Spectrum, which
Right.
is a good medical platform, but Canopy's DNA as a corporation is more generally focused on adult use in the US opportunity.
True.
You have companies like MediPharm, they're great, they're fantastic
Yeah.
at manufacturing and their quality standards. We produce a lot of our products through them, and they have a medical platform, but they're more designed to or more focused towards manufacturing and the quality of that. So I think within that, you have some players that are very good at what they do. And then you have a company like us that are really a pharma company. We're not really a cannabis company. We are more of a biotech, biopharma company that happens to use cannabinoids. And because of the pressures of the sector and because of the regulatory sort of framework, we were able to actually commercialize. So we work with a lot of those other companies as well. But in terms of formulation development, drug discovery, drug delivery, clinical, preclinical, that approach, I don't know any company that has actually executed to the extent that we have on that sort of vision. And in terms of the academic and medical community, I don't think anybody has the relationships that we had. And those relationships have taken 9 years and a lot of collaborations, a lot of research studies, a lot of work has really gone into building that out. And I think within that realm, we're alone. And I think within the global sense, because US regulations don't allow it, because in most countries you can't do the things that we do in Canada, we believe we're ahead. We believe we're substantially ahead.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And to your point, there's other MJ companies out there that have a medical division, but that's not their main mission or focus. And maybe just to kind of clear it up for people if they're not 100% sure how you license that out, or how you take the IP. You have, MediPharm, you have all these, these outsourcing opportunities, and maybe just kind of explain how, like, do you collect a royalty? Maybe just explain that. I know you're not technically a licensed producer, so excise tax comes into play. Do you think excise tax should even be levied on a medical cannabis company? Maybe if you could give your opinion on that.
Yeah, so we operate in a very asset-light model, and it's more in line with being a biotech pharma company. So we are an intellectual property company, which means it's my formulations, my data being generated on my formulations, my trademarks being utilized for commercial purposes. So in Canada, we're not a licensed producer, but we work through several licensed producers that are doing either manufacturing for us or commercial distribution for us, or in the case of MyMedi, actual delivery to patients for us. But we remain sort of as the IP company, and that's our model. It's lean, it's mean, and it's scalable, right? So if we want to now, for the sake of argument, expand into Australia, I don't have to go build a manufacturing facility and a cultivation facility. I don't have to do any of that. I can simply email my standard operating procedures, my formulations, my product release profiles, product descriptions, trademarks, and you're done, right? So scalability of being an intellectual property company is really, really important, especially when you're talking about a drug substance, a highly regulated substance that you want to move over. So it's a lot easier to move IP over than to move formulations and products. So that's always been our model. And yeah, so we work through these various licensed producers depending on the transaction or the type of commercial infrastructure we're going through. We are either booking the top line revenue because it is our transfer, or it might be just a royalty in terms of the formulations. Hence why we have a very high consolidated gross margin relative to the industry. Yeah. We're sort of in just early stages. I would argue we're in very early stages of revenue in this like 30 million range, and we're still putting up 50% gross margin. So imagine when I scale. Right? Imagine the proprietary nature of our formulations and products and services. Imagine when we scale. So it's very unique. Your question about excise tax, I think it's sort of ridiculous to have excise tax on medicine. I understand that there is pain, and I think the government is obviously overtaxing cannabis, period. I would certainly support my adult use colleagues with their argument within that. It just no one's making any type of money, so it's certainly hurting people. It's destroying jobs, it's destroying companies and retail investors and confidence and wealth. But it's even worse for medicine, right? So there's no other form of medicine in Canada that has an excise tax on it, right? There's no other form. So excise tax is levied on things like alcohol and tobacco, etc. Again, is it excessive on adult use? Yes, I agree it is. But should it even exist on medical? I would argue no. If a patient has to pay out of pocket for their, pediatric epilepsy, patients or the kid, they have to pay excise tax on that. It's pretty ridiculous, right? On top of HST, on top of this, on top of Health Canada tax, on top of it, it doesn't make sense. And a lot of this is still patient paid. I mean, we take pride that about 70% of our revenue from MyMedi is covered by reimbursement or adjudication, so payers, but you still have a lot of patients paying out of pocket, and costs and mobility is a major factor. Until we get more and more insurance coverage, patients are paying out of pocket, and then you're going to charge them excise tax. So I don't think it makes a lot of sense.
You said 60 to 70% of your revenue is coming from insurance claims?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
In terms of MyMedi revenue. So it's which is also the largest revenue driver for the company today, internationally. But yeah, we're preferred vendor with WSIB, WorkSafe BC. We're working with all the major sort of provincial boards. We're working with several private payers in terms of insurance providers. We're working with Veterans Affairs in terms of Medicare Blue Cross. So we're working with some of the larger institutions. And yeah, that's one of the other benefits of medical. And I think worth bringing this up. And I mean, this is a debate I'm often involved in terms of why do you need medical when there's adult use, right? And I think worst part about that debate is when it's a physician saying that on the other end. And I think the argument is simple. If patients are going to go to a dispensary, they're going to be speaking to a teenager that is, a cannabis connoisseur, giving them advice on what to smoke, what to eat. That's great if you're a connoisseur. But do you want your 75-year-old grandma that is unfortunately suffering from Alzheimer's disease to get that type of advice? Or do you want her to go through a pharmacist that's going to give her dosing and titration guidelines and avoid adverse events, or for her to have a bad trip, or whatever you want to call it? And that's kind of the benefit of medical, is the handle, is the physician being involved, is the pharmacist on the phone for MyMedi being involved. And then, of course, there is insurance coverage, right? So adult use is not going to have insurance coverage. So medical has benefits for the patient from several perspectives. And we've seen a lot of studies, some we've been involved with, in terms of patients that are naive, patients that would never touch medical cannabis. About 70% of them are open to medical cannabis if their physician was to prescribe it. So
it's a credibility factor, right?
Exactly. And then there's other data that proves patients that have gone through the medical cannabis journey for the first time or for 7 years and have gone through that experience have had better outcome when a physician or a medical practitioner was involved, because again, they're helping them with the dosing and stuff like that.
And interesting what you said too about the excise tax, how it shouldn't really be applied to medical. I've actually been seeing that around the United States as well, where, I think they were charging upwards of 30-40% tax on some of these to the consumer. And there's some states that are actually showing reform now where they're getting rid of that altogether. So I think you're kind of right on hitting the nail on the head with that. I think that's ultimately where we should go and where we're probably going to go. But yeah, and
who's there at the end when that happens, when they
who's going to weather the storm, right? Yeah. And just having a diversified portfolio, right? Like we don't need 1,000 licensed producers, not to knock licensed producers, not to knock the producers in general, because, if you look at, we need the producers, right? At the end of the day, if you look at alcohol producers, right, we need the producers and then the distributors and the retailers, but, quite often it's the producers who make the most money, or the people who have the patents and the IP and the formulations, right? So, even myself as a MJ avid investor and advocate, I want to be diversified as possible. So I like having, a few different Canadian companies, a few different retailers and medical plays, right? So full disclosure, I did take a position on Avicanna just for our viewers out there, and I'm looking to potentially add to that. And actually saw some pretty decent stock movement over the last couple of days as well on that DEA hearing delay notice on rescheduling. The stock was actually up like 12% that day, which to my surprise.
Right, because that tells me that we're separated from adult use. I think that tells me that whoever's paying attention to us or knows about us, which is not a large population, I can admit to that, has realized that whatever can go wrong in adult use doesn't really affect us. We are a medical company. We're scaling an international model. We're looking at, as I said, a bunch of clinical indications rather than adult use opportunities. So I don't care if Florida doesn't pass recreational. It doesn't affect me. For me, I want to go to the FDA when I have, a dossier prepared with enough clinical evidence to submit for a drug approval. So I'm not going to be the guy that sells products in the dispensary. Now, am I supportive of the peers within the industry that are advocating and hoping to see adult use progress and, get excise tax relief? Absolutely. I see how hard it's been for everybody, and
Yeah.
we've had to suffer through that as well. So I've seen how hard it is. And I think there's a lot of good companies left now. There's a lot of good operators left. A lot of the guys that were there for the pump and dump in the early days, they either made their money or they missed the train and they just said, well, I actually have to run a company. I don't want to do that. So they're off, right? So now we actually have some decent operators and hope to see the survivors sort of reap the benefits of their hard work as well. But I think there's a separation. There has to be further separation. And I think for the viewers, do they believe in the potential of medical use of cannabinoids? If they do, well, that should be done through medical companies, right? And I think that's the point I'm trying to make.
For sure. And it's still early days, right? It's a nascent industry. So just like the .com days and the tech companies, they all move together in lockstep. Like, it doesn't matter if you're profitable, unprofitable. Look at some of these other producers, if they're showing great fundamentals and great numbers and profitability, they're still down 80, 70, 80% in a bear market. So you're not immune to that sector weakness. But, you kind of touched on another one of my questions as well, with regards to volume and, not being as known in the spaces. Do you have any plans for that? Like, does the company have any tricks up your sleeve or plans for maybe, uplisting to a US major exchange, or are you looking to expand your footprint into the US through different outsourcing opportunities and partnerships? Maybe if you could give a little bit of insight into that, please.
Yeah, I think that's a good setup question that we didn't even set up in advance. So I like it. I mean, so first of all, I think what's really important is we've been head down for the last 3-4 years, and it's what you said. It's like the industry's been impacted negatively. So my number one strategy has been continue to do research and generate evidence and file patents, but also make the company self-sufficient. So our progress has obviously yielded. The company had its first EBITDA positive quarter. I think we'll have our first EBITDA positive year this year. So we've become self-sufficient through sort of the proof of concept stage of the company. So I think that means survivability. And I think that was the first thing, was let's make sure that we're there to progress and survive. And if we can make money from just medical Canada, what is the potential of this thing globally?
Right.
And pharma. So it's way bigger. But first, considering the bear markets and the sentiment of anything to do with cannabinoids being so negative, first, can you stand on your own 2 feet? And I can tell you today we've accomplished that. And I think that's very important, and feels good to say that, frankly, as a CEO.
Yeah.
So that's the key. Now, the next question is, how do you lower the cost of capital in terms of getting real valuation for your shareholders? And real stock valuation is never going to happen, in my personal opinion, on the TSX because of, again, the sentiment associated to cannabinoids, the fact that, junior stocks in Canada are so well manipulated and sort of they get away with that. And the fact that we're just not biotech investors in Canada, right? So we're just not. So we are planning to do a US listing. We are going to time it and do it without a financing. It'll just be a drop into the NASDAQ as a foreign issuer. That's the game plan. When that happens, will be a function of how we stand as a corporation and some of the strategic partnerships that we're now working on. So while we're not really getting that institutional biotech investor from the US, a lot of that has to do with all this DEA and all that, US lack of progress in terms of their own issues. But while we're not getting that, we are getting that credibility and check mark from pharma companies. So we are now engaged with several international multinational pharma companies.
Yeah.
Half a dozen multi-billion-dollar companies today are working with Avicanna through licensing technologies, buying my products or formulation, sourcing their API from us. Whatever the case is, they're involved, and they've kind of done this lap around the world, and they've said, these guys, like, they're the ones that are actually doing stuff. So they're getting involved, and I assure you they do more thorough due diligence on IP and companies than investors do. So I think that is the big validation that we were looking for. And this year we've had a few of those already come in, and there's a lot more exciting stuff coming. And as that matures, I think that sets us up to be more of a NASDAQ US listed company. And I think that's where really the real valuation will arise. And then I think that's where access to capital, larger pools of capital will come in non-dilutive, positions that we're in right now. So today, it's great to stand on your own 2 feet. Would I love to go raise $10 million and accelerate all my programs and grow internationally? Yes, but I'm not going to do that at these prices. So then,
crawl, walk, run, right? Yeah, and to your point, at the end of the day, word travels fast, right? So if you're building the foundation, you're building the story, and you've got these connections with these, huge companies, eventually it just starts to speak for itself, right? And just kind of snowballs from there. So, taking that crawl, walk, run approach, which wasn't necessarily very common at the beginning of the industry when we first rolled out, and you touched on it a little bit, and we'll get into the numbers here just real quickly in effort of time, but how do you see the medical market growing here in Canada? I know you have some pretty impressive numbers. You got 85% quarter growth over the prior quarter of 2023 compared to 2024 Q2, and then in 2023 your revenue was 16.8 million, which represented a 314% growth year over year from fiscal 2022. So that growth curve has been definitely impressive. Do you see that slowing, or do you think we're still early days in terms of medical growth?
I think so. A lot of that growth came from the acquisition of Shoppers Drug Mart, so that was obviously a major catalyst for us, and you see that impact on our top line and bottom line. So that for sure is going to impact the rest of this year in terms of year over year growth. But is medical cannabis as an opportunity going to grow? Absolutely. I think we're in very early stages. I think less than 2% of the Canadian population today are utilizing medical cannabis. A lot of them are still walking into dispensaries. A lot of their physicians are not willing to prescribe. We're a year into MyMedi, and we have very big plans in terms of how we're going to go out there and help incorporate medical cannabis into the standard of care, meaning getting your general practitioners to prescribe it for the right indication. So I do believe it's going to grow. We have 0 salespeople today, and we're growing. So we will be dedicating further resources in the Canadian market to grow, to do further medical affairs, do further clinical partnerships, work with hospitals. We already are the only medical cannabis brand that's dispensed in hospitals today, like Sunnybrook Cancer Center, etc. So we're very proud of what we've accomplished. But for me, that was all proof of concept. Now it's let's invest in it, let's grow it in Canada, and then let's replicate that globally. So do I think the medical cannabis opportunity is immense? Absolutely. I think it's a massive opportunity for medical cannabis as like a general category where you have multiple products. Like a formulary for us is like a toolkit for physicians. We train them as, this transdermal gel that, we got the patent for yesterday. That product is great for osteoarthritis, but I can't say that to a patient, but I can say that to a physician. I can show them the data. Where the slow release tablet is good for sleep. So we have the toolkit, and all of that is still medical. Then there is the pharmaceutical opportunity. And the pharmaceutical opportunity is indication-specific drugs. An example of one is, the FDA-approved Epidiolex by GW Pharma. It was sold for $7 billion to Jazz Pharmaceuticals. So there are those case studies as well. So we have about 12 of those, about 4 that are now going into later stage clinical development, and 1 that's already been approved. So then there's the pharmaceutical, which is more specific, more serious clinical indications like epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, etc., that I believe are vast. So if you look at any one of those drug programs that I have, any one of those pharmaceutical pipeline candidates, that could be its own NASDAQ listed company trading at substantially higher valuation. So I think it's really early stages. And I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is, can you survive? That's the first question, right? I think we finally answered that. So now we feel very, very good about the rest of the potential, and I think we're very well poised to execute on the rest of it.
Totally, certainly looks that way. And kudos, keep up the great work. It's been exciting learning about the company. And to your point, right, like a lot of these companies, they're just cash burning like crazy. You guys are turning cash flow positive. You once had a market cap of 150 million, 5 years ago. It's sitting at about 30, just north of 38 million today. So, the opportunity is immense. And, with regards
to then, right? I mean, we were the J&J incubated biotech company that one day may bring a drug in the market. And we're $150 million market cap, 0 patents issued, $0 of revenue. Today, tells you the sentiment and so right?
Yeah. And as you reduce your cash burn, you can reinvest that money, like you said, right? And then as long as you got the foundation, and then get everything firing on all cylinders, essentially, right? Start to expand and into other markets. What about Schedule 3? That seems like it's pretty much a done deal at this point. Obviously it was a letdown that it's getting delayed, but I think it's going through due process. It shows that they're committed. It's also not something that can come back to bite us in the, if if they didn't have a hearing. Like what's your plans with regards to Schedule 3? Do you have a plan for that if it inevitably gets approved?
Yeah, so I think we have as I mentioned, we have a number of drug candidates that are more designed for more of the FDA pathway that we have produced, developed, commercialized, done preclinical, done some observational real world evidence studies in humans, got a good signal. So we have a bunch of drug candidates that we do want to proceed to take into the FDA pathway. It's a really nice pathway to take in terms of co-development, because I can go to pharma companies and say, I got it up to here. You now come and invest and kind of take it the rest of the pathway, and I don't have to then, go into the negative again to fund that. So
right.
I think with rescheduling and with the US progressing over time, it's going to open up the opportunity for us as a company to work with real US operators, real US pharma companies, real US biotech, healthcare investors, the likes of which we don't really have in Canada. And I think it's only going to open up the opportunity for that. So I think what gets the adult use operators excited about US regulations for me is sort of interesting, because I see the opportunity in the US much more towards medical and pharma, which is what we do. So I think it's going to open up the gateways for that. It's going to open up, and we're just trying to be as far ahead as we can before that opens, because once that opens, that's going to be critical mass. That's going to be a lot of resources that are going to get dedicated, and we're poised to be the partner for a lot of these companies.
Well, it's a good time to be turning cash flow positive, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, by the time this goes out, we closed the private placement with institutional and internal shareholder base, and we will be eliminating and retiring the only debt we had on our balance sheet. So we're going to be, on the positive, and we're going to be debt free, which I think probably make us one of the only companies in the industry that can, or at least adjacent to the industry, that can say such a thing. So I think we're in a really, really strong place, for sure, the best place we've ever been in our history.
For sure. And you did mention raising it a couple of times. I did see that the cash at the end of the last period, so that ended June 30th, 2024, sitting at just north of 488,000. Is that a concern for you at all? Obviously, with the profitability metrics starting to turn a corner, probably I would assume not. But what is your plan there? Are you worried about the cash position, or maybe you could just touch on that real quick?
Yeah, I would say I'm the least worried about our cash position that I've ever been in my Avicanna career, and that's because we are on the up and up, as you noticed, but also we've conducted very strategic private placements, non-brokered, with only existing shareholders that are sophisticated. They're along for the long ride, and they have helped us fund the company. And I think at this stage now, with the equity raise that will be announced today, today's August 28th. By the time it gets released, this video gets released, already be out. We are debt free, so we feel very good. We don't have $20 million cash in our bank, but I'm also not going to go raise that at 38 cent stock. So I feel confident with what we can execute at this stage and with what's coming.
Absolutely. And those gross margins are nothing to joke about. 50% gross margins, and usually the industry averages are somewhere between 20 and 30%. Sometimes you see, north of that, but those are just fantastic margins. So kudos to you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, we think as we scale, we'll be towards more of like the 60 to 70% margin, which is in line with, software, biotech, pharma. Because that's what we operate as, right? So this is still like we're outsourcing many things. We're not a licensed producer. We're only in Canada from a real revenue material revenue perspective. So as these things all scale, I think we're going to demonstrate very different profitability margin, but also scalability, which is, I think, very important.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we've gone. I could probably talk to you for another hour at least, but we'll wrap it up in effort of time and a respect to your time. I appreciate your time today. Is there anything you want to leave the audience with? How can they get in touch with you? Is there anything that you want to close out with?
No, I think they can contact us contact me on LinkedIn or info@avicanna.com. We're happy to answer questions. It's an interesting phase for the company. I think just pay attention to it. It's going to be a fun ride, and a lot of people that are fans of MJ, I know a lot of your audience are. I think a lot of them believe in the potential of cannabinoids as medicine, right, and the benefit it has for people as a natural ingredient. So are we. Right. We just want to do it the right way. We want to standardize it, and we want to get the medical community to adopt it. And I think that's what we've done, and that's what we'll continue to do. And I think the potential for that, as I mentioned, is massive. So let's enjoy the ride.
Absolutely. Well, I'll be following the story. Thanks again for joining me, Aras. It was a great conversation, and hopefully have you back on in the near future.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me again, man.
My pleasure. It was a great conversation. Appreciate it. Take care.